Some secrets remain unspoken, lingering in the silence between words. Catherine believed she knew everything about her marriage, until one evening shattered that illusion. A simple dinner invitation from her husband's boss turns into something far more sinister, planting seeds of doubt that threaten to unravel everything she thought was certain. How well do we really know the people we love? And what happens when hesitation speaks louder than the truth? Welcome to Echoes of the Past. I always thought I understood my world, that marriage was a union with its ups and downs, but ultimately, both partners remained on the same side. However, one evening changed everything, making me question what I had considered unshakable. It was just an ordinary day. My morning started with the usual rush, a strong cup of coffee, a quick kiss before work, a chat with a friend about what recipe to try for dinner. Andrew was staying late at the office more often, but I chalked it up to stress and new projects. That evening, when he finally came home, I expected the usual remarks about a tough day. Instead, he said, "We need to go to dinner with Jonathan." I frowned. "Your boss? Why?" Andrew hesitated, as if choosing his words carefully. He said he wanted to discuss something important, and he specifically asked for you to be there too. I paused before responding. I had met Jonathan a few times, charismatic, confident, a man who always managed to win people over. In his 60s, he carried himself with impeccable manners and an insightful gaze, as if he always saw more than was spoken. There was something unsettling about him, though I could never quite pinpoint what. "Is this some kind of corporate dinner?" I asked. "No, just the three of us." That answer put me on edge. Usually such gatherings included other colleagues and their wives, but not this time. I wanted to refuse. Something about this invitation felt off, but when I looked at Andrew, I saw tension in his expression, discomfort. Maybe something at work was bothering him, and I needed to be there to support him. "All right," I nodded. I chose a dark blue dress, elegant but not flashy. Light makeup, neatly styled hair. As we left the house, I felt a strange sense of unease, but dismissed it as simple nerves before an important conversation. The restaurant was expensive. Dim lighting, soft jazz music, perfectly arranged glasses. But the most striking thing was the table, set for three. "Where's your wife?" I asked Jonathan as we sat down. He smiled, but for a moment a shadow flickered in his eyes. "She's visiting her sister," he replied. "So tonight it's just the three of us." I didn't know what to say. Instead, I took a sip of wine, hoping the tension would dissolve. But soon I realized this evening would be far from ordinary. I never liked corporate dinners. Forced smiles, empty compliments, conversations that felt more like carefully orchestrated performances than genuine exchanges. But that evening was different. As the waiter refilled our glasses, the discussion started as expected: work, company changes, successes, and challenges. Jonathan spoke effortlessly, wielding the charisma that had brought him to his position. He knew how to hold attention, how to keep people engaged. But as we moved toward the main course, I began to notice that his words, his glances, were not as casual as they seemed. "Andrew, you're an incredibly lucky man," he said, swirling his wine. My husband smiled and looked at me. "I know," but Jonathan didn't avert his gaze. He held his eyes on me a little longer than was appropriate. "A woman like you, elegant, intelligent, beautiful." He paused as if weighing each word. "That's rare." I felt warmth rise to my cheeks. Compliments were nothing unusual, but there was something else in his tone. Andrew chuckled. "Jonathan, you flatter her." Jonathan smiled, but something in his expression made me uneasy. The conversation continued, but the tension in me remained. Then, as dessert arrived, Jonathan leaned forward, resting on his elbows. "There's something I've been thinking about for a while," he said, looking at my husband. Andrew raised an eyebrow. "Thinking?" Jonathan tilted his head slightly, as if contemplating his words. "Oh, the longer you live, the more you realize that life becomes predictable. Sometimes to shake things up, you need to step beyond the usual boundaries. It can be an exhilarating experience. I felt my stomach tighten. There was a subtext in his words, something elusive but disturbing. Andrew frowned. I'm not sure I understand. Jonathan's gaze flickered towards me before returning to my husband. I respect you, Andrew, and your marriage. But let's just say, I've always believed that boundaries can be flexible, under the right circumstances. A heavy silence filled the air. My pulse quickened. Whatever he was about to say next, it would change the course of the evening. What if, just once, those boundaries blurred a little? I tightened my grip on my wine glass. Andrew was processing what he had heard, his expression caught between confusion and shock. I expected him to shut the conversation down immediately, but he remained silent. Excuse me, Jonathan, but could you clarify? He finally said. I mean exactly what I said, Jonathan replied calmly. A reconsideration of boundaries. Exploring new possibilities. Why not? A wave of panic rose within me. Was he really suggesting what I thought he was? I turned to my husband, hoping to see anger, outrage, anything but hesitation. Andrew? My voice trembled. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. Jonathan, I don't think... He hesitated, and that hesitation was enough. Jonathan tilted his head slightly as if he had expected this exact reaction. You didn't say no, he observed with a smirk. I felt everything inside me clench. Why didn't he say no? After that evening at the restaurant, I couldn't find peace. It was as if a worm of doubt had settled inside me, gnawing away from within. I tried to convince myself that it was just a stupid misunderstanding, that Jonathan had merely thrown out a provocative phrase to test our reaction, but the fact that Andrew didn't respond immediately, that he hesitated, wouldn't leave my mind. We drove home in tense silence. I stared out the window, watching the city lights blur into the darkness. A storm of emotions raged inside me, but I didn't know how to express them. How do you talk about something that feels so wrong, yet refuses to leave your thoughts? Andrew was the first to break the silence. You do realise that was just provocation, right? He likes testing people. His voice lacked confidence. I turned to him, searching his face for any hints of what he was really thinking. Is that what you think? I asked, crossing my arms. Or is that just what you want to believe? He gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles turning white. Of course, that's what I think, he muttered. Jonathan is known for his eccentric behaviour. You know what his views are like. To him, this is just a game. A game? I scoffed. And what about you? Do you think it's just a game too? He sighed, running a hand through his hair. What do you want from me, Catherine? Do you want me to say that I liked it? That it intrigued me? He cast me a quick glance before focusing back on the road. Or, on the contrary, do you want to hear that I was outraged? I remained silent. I didn't even know what I wanted. I needed to hear him say that he condemned the very idea, that it disgusted him. But at the same time, I was afraid he'd say it just because he was supposed to, not because he truly felt that way. When we reached the house, I quickly got out of the car and headed for the door. I needed to be alone. Andrew caught up with me and grabbed my hand. Let's not turn this into a tragedy, he said quietly. We're adults. Let's just forget about it. I pulled my hand away. Forget? I repeated bitterly. Do you really think I can forget this? I walked into the house, leaving him standing at the door. I went upstairs to the bedroom and locked myself in the bathroom. I turned on the water, but even the sound of the stream couldn't drown out the thoughts in my head. Jonathan had planted the seed of doubt, but the real cracks in our marriage hadn't appeared because of him. They had been there all along. He had only helped them surface. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes shimmered with unshed tears. I didn't recognize myself. At that moment, it felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, and it was up to me to decide. take a step forward, or turn around and walk away. But the problem was, I didn't know which option was worse. We drove in silence. Only the steady hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of streetlights illuminated Andrew's tense features. I glanced at him furtively, hoping to catch even a shadow of regret, but his face remained unreadable. "Andrew," my voice came out quieter than I had intended. "Why didn't you say no right away?" His grip on the steering wheel tightened. "It all happened too suddenly," he muttered. "I just didn't know how to respond properly." I let out a laugh, sharp, almost hysterical. "Really? You didn't know how to respond to a proposal that completely destroys our marriage?" He abruptly turned onto our street and parked in front of the house. For a few seconds we just sat there in silence. "I don't want to fight," he said tiredly, "and I don't want to live with someone who even considered such an offer," I shot back. His jaw tightened. "That's not fair," he snapped. "You saw how he framed it. It was more of a test than a real proposition. And you failed it." The words hung between us like a heavy weight. Andrew closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then stepped out of the car without another word and headed for the house. I stayed in my seat, my heart pounding so loudly it felt like it could be heard from outside. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe Jonathan really had just been playing. But then why wasn't there disgust in Andrew's eyes? Only hesitation? I got out of the car and slowly walked up the steps. When I entered the house, Andrew had already poured himself a whiskey. "Want one?" he offered without looking at me. "No," I replied curtly. "All right," he said, and took a long sip. I watched him stand by the window, his shoulders tense. He was deep in thought. "You're not actually considering it, are you?" I asked cautiously. Andrew looked at me as if I had just asked the dumbest question in the world. "Of course not," he said, but that answer wasn't enough for me. It lacked the certainty I had been hoping for. I nodded, turned, and headed for the bedroom. "We need to talk," he called after me. "It's late," I replied, closing the door behind me. I lay down in bed, but sleep wouldn't come. We had been together for over 20 years. We had been through hard times, supported each other, and yet one evening in Jonathan's company had shattered my confidence that our marriage was unshakable. I closed my eyes, but immediately Jonathan's face appeared in my mind. His confident smile, piercing gaze, the way he spoke. He knew what he was doing. He knew he would plant doubt, and he was right. I turned onto my side, squeezing my eyes shut. What if this was only the beginning? The house was filled with tense silence. After talking to my friend, I had hoped to find some comfort in familiar surroundings, but instead I was engulfed by an oppressive sense of loneliness. Andrew sat in his office, buried in work, or perhaps just pretending to be. I could hear him occasionally getting up, pacing the room, then sitting down again. Even in his movements, his uncertainty was apparent. I made myself some tea, but it quickly grew cold, left untouched. We had been avoiding each other all day, and by evening it had become unbearable. Finally, I took a deep breath and walked over to him. "We can't keep going on like this," I said, stopping in the doorway. Andrew lifted his head from the monitor, his eyes filled with exhaustion, mixed with something else, something I was afraid to name. "I know." His voice was hoarse, as if he hadn't spoken in hours. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "You realize your hesitation is only making things worse?" He sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't know how to process this. Jonathan, he's a master manipulator. He speaks in a way that makes you question even the most obvious things. The real question is, why did this even make me think twice? My heart clenched painfully. This was the first time he admitted what was truly bothering him. He wasn't just outraged or dismissive. He was trying to understand why this situation had thrown him off balance. Maybe because you like the possibility itself? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Andrew looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. No. Or yes, I don't know. It's not that I want it, it's that I even considered it, and that scares me. I took a step forward and sat down across from him. What scares you more, Jonathan himself or your thoughts about him? He closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself. Probably both. Jonathan is someone who knows how to blur boundaries, and I'm not sure I'm comfortable with how easily he does it. I nodded silently. We both knew this conversation wouldn't give us easy answers, but it needed to happen, because if we didn't figure out our feelings now, later, it might be too late. I stood up, stepping closer to him, and placed a hand on his shoulder. We need to figure this out together. You and me. Without Jonathan, without his propositions. Just us. Andrew nodded, covering my hand with his. For the first time in days, I felt like there was still something real between us. But the question remained, would it be enough to hold us together? The silence in the house felt suffocating. Ever since that evening with Jonathan and the conversations with Andrew, I felt trapped in an endless maze of thoughts. I moved through the house, mechanically performing my usual tasks, but everything felt like a blur. Andrew had changed too. He became distant, often stayed late at work, and when he came home, his eyes were filled with tension. We both avoided talking about that dreadful night, but the silence was eating me alive. One evening, I couldn't take it anymore. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" I asked, when he sat across from me at the kitchen table. Andrew looked at me, exhausted. "Honestly? Yes." I tensed but forced myself to stay calm. "Why?" He remained silent for a long time, then ran a hand over his face and exhaled heavily. "Because it made me think." "Think about what, Andrew? That our relationship doesn't mean anything to you anymore?" My voice betrayed me, trembling slightly. "No." He stood up abruptly. "Not at all. But I can't deny that there was a strange logic in what Jonathan said." My hands clenched into fists. Logic? In his attempt to destroy our marriage? Or maybe he just offered a new perspective? That was the last straw. "Are you serious?" I shot up, the chair crashing to the floor behind me. "A new perspective? You talk about this like it's some kind of experiment, not our marriage, not our life." Andrew looked lost, but didn't back down. "I'm just trying to figure out my feelings, okay?" I shook my head, feeling the pain rising in my chest. "If you haven't figured them out after all these years, Andrew, maybe we should really ask ourselves, do we still have an us?" Those words seemed to hit him the hardest. He lowered his head, staring at the floor for a long time, then finally said in a quiet voice, "I don't want to lose you." "Then maybe you should stop looking for a way out where there isn't one." A heavy silence fell between us. Andrew looked broken, but I couldn't comfort him anymore, because I felt betrayed. That night I lay awake for hours. Andrew's words and Jonathan's twisted through my mind. What if I was missing something? What if our life had become so predictable that he was terrified of being stuck in it forever? I didn't know what to do. But one thing was clear, our relationship would never be the same again. I look at my reflection in the window. The city outside blurs into streaks of passing car lights. My mind is empty, but inside, a storm rages. Jonathan no longer plays a role in this story, yet his shadow still lingers over us. Andrew sits at the kitchen table, drumming his fingers against the surface. We both know that after that night in the restaurant, our marriage changed. It's no longer the same, and perhaps it never will be. "Are you still angry?" His voice is careful, almost hesitant. I turn to him slowly. "I'm not angry," I say honestly. "I'm just scared. I don't know who you are anymore." Andrew bites his lip as if he wants to say something important, but instead he just runs a hand through his hair. He looks exhausted. So am I. "I made a mistake," he finally says. "But I never wanted to lose you." I smile. bitterly, tiredly. But you didn't say no right away, Andrew. You even considered it. That's the wound I can't ignore. He doesn't respond. His silence speaks louder than any words. I need to leave, to clear my head, to understand if we have a future, or if it was lost in that single moment of hesitation. I grab my coat, feeling his gaze on me. He doesn't stop me. He only asks, "Will you come back?" I don't know what to say. As I step outside, I inhale the crisp night air. In this moment, I am alone, free, and lost. I take a step forward, not knowing where this path will lead. The end? Or just the beginning? Was I walking away? Or towards something new? If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Echoes of the Past, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. More thrilling stories are coming soon.